that the blue pill? Is that the same thing?
Hi, you are live with Lila and...
Hey, Doug Thompson.
Hi, Doug Thompson.
How are you this morning?
Well, we were just talking. We don't have to pretend for these people that we weren't already in the middle of a conversation.
I don't. Who are you again, and why am I here?
I looped you in. I got beta access to
yes, there we go.
The scheduling feature for LinkedIn Live on LinkedIn. Cool. And I was like, well, who should I be beta testing with? Oh, I know.
Yes, I am the crash test dummy. I've got that. So we're
is that a bald joke?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Well, there's no one that makes me feel more comfortable being in the beta of my business, my life, myself than you. So yeah, I was like, perfect. And he gets technology beta. This might not work. It looks like Harsh Kumar is here. Yeah. He said it's good to see happy smiles. What's up, Harsh? So good to see him on this positivity chat that Steve Sullivan and Karen Markle host the other day, and then just got into the messages with him a little bit. We know incredible people, you and I.
Yes, we do.
Just from being on the LinkedIn platform and getting connected this way, mostly because we're drawn to each other's stories.
Yes. No, it was funny when we were talking the other day. I realized that we hadn't. You put a post up about sort of initial conversations and things like that, and you got a little bit more selective about things. I said, I'm glad I made it in under the bar. And then you remembered that the first time we really met, we'd exchanged a couple comments and stuff on LinkedIn, and it was in person. You were speaking down at the Austin LinkedIn local when you can actually go someplace.
Right.
And but it was really fun. It's one of those. It's one of those connections you just sort of get. There's that energy connection that goes on that you can't really describe, but it sort of put the. And what was funny was you matched exactly the imagination I had about you just from the conversations and stuff we have. So it's really great when the persona you see from a text and type thing actually matches in real life.
That's the best. You know what's like the opposite of that? The worst.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's always the same. It's the best or the worst. You have
I had an experience in person in Dallas with somebody who was visiting from out of town and who had this persona online of being so supportive and so approachable and so whatever. I'm not talking about Tony Bubb, by the way. I met Tony when I met you, right? Or no, she was in Houston.
No, yeah, she's in Houston.
Yeah, it's just getting my Texases mixed up still.
That's a big place. One big city, it all works.
Yeah. Oh, I love this. I'm like a blue sky and you're like a green earth.
Oh, well, I don't have to mow my lawn, so we're
You can have half of my hair and still I would be fine.
I don't think I could deal with it anymore. I've been this way for a couple decades, and I kind of like it. It's I just go out a little sunscreen on my head and out I go.
Oh, that's a good idea. I always wonder about that. If bald men and women remember to put on sunscreen on their heads.
After the first time you remembered it. that only happens once.
And then someone gives you a upside the head, right? And you're like,
yeah.
Oh man, I really smarted this time.
I keep waiting for somebody when I fall asleep or take a nap out there. Somebody puts their hand, so I have this little white hand on my head that goes on. That'd be kind of funny.
That's what I would do. I would put stickers. I would sneak little stickers onto your head.
Okay, I'm not going to take a nap.
Yeah. I'm going to tell her you're missing an opportunity here.
Yeah. Well, back to your thing about the person had this one persona online, and then
that was the whole story.
I can't connect. I don't understand those people. I have a hard enough time being me 100% of the time. I couldn't imagine being two different things. That would be exhausting.
Yeah. It would
need some birds.
Oh God. I hate birds. Get rid of that comment. I hate birds. We have a real story, a real question here. So we could probably get into the stuff now that a few people are joining us.
Mr. Biddles is along too.
Oh, Mr. Biddles. I love Mr. Biddles. Jeffrey Maboya, thank you for the question. If storytelling is a necessity, how do we ethically tell stories of social justice that involve technology? I think that if you're thinking about even just what do you call it, a revolution in Egypt,
Mm-hmm.
uprising, over.
Yeah, it lowers that barrier to getting the message out that we didn't have before.
Yeah.
Because before and well, you can still see it today if you look at major media type things, and even some of the outlets that are controlling this. It needs to be unfettered, where you get the story and you make up your own mind about what's going on, and access to that is critical. And you notice one of the first things when I look around, the first thing they do is shut down the internet or try to block things.
Right.
They're going
Right.
So that's
because
the ability
story
to
is
share
the greatest power we have.
Yeah, exactly.
My family is Jewish by culture and heritage, and we have passed down our tradition, our culture, or like who we are as a people through story. And in many cases, because we've been silenced, and tried to, like, people have tried to eradicate Jewish people as like an entire religion, a genocide. And so what we have to fight, the excuse me, the dehumanization of people that would lead to people buying into the ability to do things like that, or in other terms that people might understand, like owning slaves, you'd have to see someone as not human in order to own them as property.
Yeah.
And once your eyes are open and you see someone as human, there is no going back. You can't unsee someone's humanity. And the more we share stories, the more humanity connects, and the more we are unable to go back to seeing people as anything other than individuals who each have a soul and spirit.
Yeah, I mean, once you talk to somebody, it was really interesting here. I live in a outside of Austin, and there was, after the one of the big things that broke out, we had a young African American man that stood in town, and he was like on one of the busy corners. And he said, take a chance, stop and talk to me. And he stood all day out there. It was 100+ degrees. What was really, there was such a long line of people that actually did want to talk to him, and it's like, if you actually talk to people and try to go in with a blank slate and not have this unconscious bias that goes in simply because, oh, you look like XYZ, so that must mean you're this. And that's, at Microsoft, where we've gone through the series of training about unconscious biases, and a bias is not a bad thing in itself. It's the way the brain processes this information. What happens is, if you have these other things which don't give you that clear picture, they sort of push you in one direction, and you make assumptions about somebody or something just because, well, I had this experience back then, so that, A equals B and everybody's true. Like, all bald-headed men we're all tall men are great at basketball and these other things. Well, no.
Are that data. Our experiences are those data that enter our algorithm. Like, if our brain is an algorithm, we learn to process the data that we are given and shown, which is why representation matters so much, and diversity in the stories that we share, because we are responsible for what enters our algorithm. Same as like, if you're on LinkedIn right now, it's so stupid, like in context, but if you're on LinkedIn, you don't like the content you're seeing, go find something else, or go put something up and ask for, say, I'm looking for stories about, right? I think we each have the ability to curate what enters our algorithm once we're old enough to know, and educated enough to know that that's possible. But we spend our whole lives forming opinions that inform our decisions, and those opinions might not be at the top of mind, but they are how our algorithm just functions. It's not like the LinkedIn algorithm is like intentionally not showing me things about Bitcoin. Like, don't show her this, but maybe it has seen I don't engage with that stuff. Well, so that's the catch-22, and that's where artificial intelligence and stuff comes in. On the one side of it, it gives you more of what you engage with and less of what you don't. And the downside to that is you get a very myopic and one-sided view of, especially if it's an issue-related type thing, you get one side of that. And we sort of listen to that, and it reinforces whatever biases and things we have, as opposed to actually making an effort to go out and see the other side Yeah.
of if there's a side, and trying to look at blank slate and trying to understand and empathize with what their story is. And it's shouting at me does no good. But if you sit down and we have a story, and it can be passionate. I mean, it doesn't have to be monotone or anything, because I really you can see passion.
Yeah.
But it's not an attack. It's not, like I said, it's not dehumanizing. Dehumanizing. There we go. Dehumidifying. We need some of that right now. It's kind of hot.
I do.
But dehumanizing the people, and that's where you actually have that engagement. And too much of the media and technology today, hey, we're in this camp or this, we're in the red or blue, and you're saturated, and that's your point of view of the world.
We have an interesting comment here from Jeffrey. Jeffrey, you and I are going to have to go one-on-one sometime, because I think your ideas and questions here are interesting. Jeffrey says technology stories should reinforce. I'm going to just argue with the word should, right? I think saying what something should be, rather than asking a question or telling the story around, even in this opportunity, to say let me tell you a story about how technology has reinforced shared values between me and someone else. And then giving people in the audience a chance to maybe learn from that and come to the same conclusion that technology stories should reinforce shared values. If you just say it, rather than sharing an insight, it seems like one person's opinion and not like an experience we can all relate to. So let's do that. Let's honor Jeffrey's suggestion here, that we explore technology as a way of, or technology stories as a way of reinforcing shared values or exploring values. So what are some technologies or implementations or use cases of AI right now that you think are in the values sphere, that are impacting communities and individuals and bringing them together?
Oh, there's there's a lot of examples of that, and it's sort of emerging. And a lot of it is to open, AI by itself. It's not like a human brain, which we're right now we're sort of in this not in general, but we're very narrow focused on AI. So it's narrow AI. It can do X, Y, Z, whatever the algorithm's programmed to do, and it does that. And where it excels is taking vast amount of unstructured data and unstructured data, more than 100 humans could consume in a lifetime, and presenting that data based on the algorithm for different things you're looking for. For example, this isn't necessarily for social justice or anything, but they went back and reviewed some of the JFK files or these other things that brought up this, that people have been, JFK files have been out there for a gazillion years. Well, for 40 years or 50 years or so.
You mean about the
assassination, right?
Okay.
And so by doing some analysis of that, there were some facts and stuff that were brought out that hadn't previously been discovered. And it's because we could take, this big piece, this massive amount of unstructured data that don't seem to be connected, and make connections of things that previously we just didn't, because it's almost like you're clearing. You're clearing the lens a little bit, because now there's all this information, or the forest for the trees analogy, if you do that, right? So you got all these trees, I can't see the one or the one thing that I'm looking for. So it's really great at doing that. But the thing we have to keep in mind, there's a couple of things. One is, we're humans that are training these models and creating these models, and as humans, we bring, as we talked about before, bias into that.
Right.
And so how do you make
AI to be aligned with our values?
You should. I mean, so on one hand, you could do that with what your values of what you're looking for. On the other hand, it's agnostic, and it doesn't really take either side. It simply presents data for us to then have a dialogue about. Because I can see data one way and you can see data another way.
I think that
and then it's up.
Communication is for, right? So that
exactly.
And when we tell the story of what we experience of data, and somebody else is like, how can that be your experience of this data? I have a completely different experience. It's one thing to say, I've experienced discrimination because data, and somebody else looks at that same data and says, what you're experiencing as maybe you're being discriminated against, I can explain as using this other context. right?
Yeah.
The danger is that it becomes very invalidating of people's ability to interpret the data of their lives.
Yeah, well, statistics. What was it? I think Mark Twain. There's
Truth,
there's lies, damn lies, and statistics.
right, that's like the worst.
Right, right, and it's
So,
again, if you have this neutral set of data that's left up to us to interpret, and I think if you're going from the social justice type thing, can we look at it from a clean lens, and maybe look at it from different perspectives as opposed to what my experience would be, so that I have to be open to hearing other people's experiences, because my experience shapes everything
yeah.
that I do. And when I talk to people about, when I talk to my fellow nerds about, talking about technology or how they tell a story about technology, the very first thing they have to understand, one, they have to understand how the technology works. That's great. That's fine. That's pretty binary. That's 1 and 0. It works, right? But now I have to make it where it's, we used to call this fuzzy logic way back in the day, where it's not, it's gray. But it is great because now I can mold that technology to help whoever I'm talking to solve a problem from their perspective, because their problem.
To answer this question from Banu Pratap Mishra, thank you for joining us, has asked, since narrative defines the framework of the story, how do you cater to the audience? So, like, where does that person that the technology is supposed to serve fit in the way you choose which story to tell?
So what I do is try to learn something about that person's experience and all that. So I do LinkedIn stalking. So we're going on a call, right? So I'll look, okay, what are they posting about? What are they look, or do they talk about anything? Do they have a passion? Is it fishing? Is it something else that goes on that I can find something there that I can then relate to it and sort of hook? Here's their perception. So they like fishing, these other things. So when I need to explain, because inevitably you get down to, well, how does this work? And I don't want to get down into the algebra, because I couldn't pass 7th grade math now if I had to. But I can explain what's going on in something that relates to them, like if you're fly fishing and all that, and I get them to sort of picture, what was your best day fly fishing? So I get them to sort of set the stage and the narrative for the story that I then go and tell. So it helps me, being a polymath, knowing a little bit about a lot, to have a lot of different interests where I can sort of pull those skills in to tailor that message to them. Because in the big secret is I have about 4 or 5 stories. If you broke it down to, but I rearrange them all the time. So the framework.
I have like 4 or 5 big stories too.
Yeah.
The pieces of them that I pull out based on the person that I'm talking to help them trust.
Yeah, and I would think your acting background, where you have to pull on these separate emotions, you probably have certain, if you've got to cry or do something like that, you probably pull upon this memory of the story that you have, that works and can do this, right?
You know what's interesting? I'm an easy crier. I cry all the time. I cry like
joy, happy, you can't really
anything. Somebody brings me like a really nice bottle of wine and some cheese, and I'm like, it's so nice. Or kolaches in your case, helps me run after a neighbor's cat. And like my Doug Thompson and I have this very interesting personal story while we're all here, right? About how he showed up for me and what I needed on that day. We were supposed to go and have lunch and meet up in person. And I had done this video with my friend Kedma and left the back door open, through which my roommate at the time, her cat escaped. She's at her first day at a new job that kept her there very late, like training and stuff, and she was barely able to even answer her phone. I hate cats and like don't want to even touch one, and like certainly don't want to be running after one. But I'm like, I've lost this woman's cat, and she, we're never going to be friends again. Like, I am responsible for the death of a feline, like all the things that are going through my head. And I'm like, and I have lunch with Doug in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So I texted him and I was like, Doug, I don't know if this is going to happen. Like, I'll probably be a little late. I'm trying to find this cat. Like, he's like, what? What do you mean you're trying to find this cat? Comes over with a box of kolaches that he picked up on the way from Waco or in Waco from Austin up to Dallas. And so I've got like pastries. I've got Doug, who I'm meeting, like really to have one-on-one time with for the first time. And this cat is missing. I ended up on the ground in winter there is actually winter in Texas for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Or really for 8 hours. And I was on the ground for all of those 8 hours under the porch next door when we finally found this cat. But Doug was so supportive during that time. It's a digression in the story here.
I know, but it's what makes, it's sort of that connection, right? And we'd met down in Austin for briefly when you were talking about things at the LinkedIn local, and then we'd had some conversations. But that's what happens. Life happens and comes in. And I think during this whole COVID thing, we found out a lot about that by kids coming into the thing, or dogs, or
reality.
Yeah, and that getting back to that dehumanizing, that makes it impossible if you've got the kid or somebody coming in to dehumanize that person.
Right.
So I mean, that's the great thing. Yeah.
And in this case, if we can use this story example for a teachable moment. Mm-hmm. Not everybody watching this broadcast is going to be the kind of person who wants that personal story about our friendship, our connection. Yeah. So if we're creating this broadcast with them in mind, we focus on, what's the AI at Microsoft? What are the new products? How do you sell those things with a story? If that's the audience for this, then I've deviated. I've not done my job of giving them what they want.
Right. Mm-hmm.
However, this is a show on my LinkedIn profile. And the people who are here, I know these people. Like, I know Lori Knudsen. Look, she's responding to exactly what we're talking about. Michael Evans. I know these people. Doug and I both know these people. I mean, there are all kinds of people that we just know and love. If you look at the people who are in the audience, they tell you what they're here for. They're here for us. They're here for us. If we want to repurpose this content later, then we might edit the download of this video to just focus on some of the stories that are mostly focused on technology. We got one for social justice people. We can talk about, but that is the point. You create the stories that are there for the actual people who are listening to you and will be using the product. What we want people to be using the product here is storytelling.
Yeah. And it's funny, I see Jeffrey, he put up about democratizing storytelling, which is interesting. It's not necessarily the technology that does that. Again, to tell a story, I don't think there's an AI algorithm. I need to go check that. That's interesting. Is there an AI algorithm out there that can conjure up a story? You've got AI now where it does very good from a voice, where it's hard to discern between, is it a computer or is it not? Used to, you could easily tell that. Now it's getting a little harder. But I don't think there's one that can put words on a page. It could use, here's some structure, but it can't make that connection to us as a true story. A true story is going to pull on your emotions, because that's what makes that unique, and that's what makes the story so powerful.
Right.
Right. Exactly. And they're best if they're about you or something that you've experienced. But I tell Lila's cat, our cat introduction a lot.
I do too.
That,
yeah. Or what people learn from that story, that because you're a very impressive person. Yes, you're silly. Yes, you're fun. Yes, you will run after cats with me and bring kolaches and have a sock puppet friend. And there are all these things that you could see similar to me and my personality, that I'm silly, I'm fun, I'm ridiculous.
Yeah.
But we're both so competent at what we do and so well respected in our fields that we are confident enough to be our silliest selves.
Yeah.
What are you going to say? I can't communicate? Okay. What are you going to say? That Doug Thompson doesn't know technology? All right. Sure. Right? But democratizing storytelling is really just a decision, isn't it? That you, the person watching this, has the right and responsibility even to tell stories.
Yeah, and it's how you use the story. Again, if you watch TV for the last 2 weeks, you've seen stories mainly used, some used for good, some used for bad over the last 2 weeks, any evening that you went into. And it's a perspective type thing. Again, it's saying they're trying to elicit an emotion out of the audience. And unfortunately, it goes back to sort of that thing. The blue people were watching last week and the red people were watching this week. Right. And, and nobody, and if you got what you wanted to see, if you came to watch any of those. which is not the way that I used to have when I was in Seattle. I was riding, would go on these long when I was doing my Ironman training and team and training, and I would ride with somebody which was the opposite political view of me.
Like you would end up doing that, or you would seek them out?
No, he bought me beer, so it was okay. he was actually my mentor on the first team in training, but we hit it off. It was a personality off. And we had this indifference, but we would get on some of the best conversations, and it wasn't to convince one person that they're wrong or to come to the other side. It was to educate. And we would tell these stories, and he would pull in things, and I would pull in things. But it was such a great connection that comes on that's where I learned things. And anytime you can go on and learn something new about something or something, then that's great. And when I go talk technology, sometimes I'll tell these stories with my perception of what they're telling me their problem is or what their need is. And sometimes you miss that. But if you listen, I always find customers tell me exactly what they want.
So you're
if I'm open to listening, right?
Yeah. So tell me about the tools you're using. You talked about LinkedIn stalking as like one way of listening, right? When you're thinking about who a technology is designed for, how are you listening to that person before you start to tell the story of how they'll use it?
Yeah, hopefully I've had a couple meetings, with them before, and it brings me back to the movie. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Maverick. With it had Mel Gibson was playing Maverick on that, but he goes to this poker game, and it takes place in the West, and he's watching for the first hour. He's watching everybody play poker, and they all have a tell when they get good cards or bad cards, and he's learning that during this whole first time. So I will spend a lot of those conversations. If I have to talk, usually there's a couple of us there, and I try to listen more than I talk. And I play this little game with myself. My goal is to get them to talk about 2/3 more than I talk.
It's a good game. I should learn from that game.
Yeah. So because I find if I'm on the other end of it, that's where I end up going in and missing the target on that. But it's just sometimes you just have a conversation. You see, they'll say something, and tell me a little bit more about that. What how is that? What did it? Just trying to get a little bit like Columbo. I'm trying to get. I got one more question.
I like the suggestion you had. Just simply saying, tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
If you're setting your intentions to learn, so that you can educate later, but in this one moment, this one conversation, your objective is to learn everything you can about what, why, and how a new technology can be useful to someone. So you're listening to their story so that you know what kind of story to return.
Exactly. And the best thing to do is that from having a bunch of these different conversations, a bunch of different stories, I learn things, people in similar roles or similar things, that they have some pains that this other customer may not have had yet. Right. So I'm sort of almost like, hey, in addition to, have you thought about XYZ? And a lot of no, I hadn't thought about that. Well, I had a customer, and I can use this as a relation type thing.
Yeah.
That came in across this, and it caused this or caused that, or by doing that they enabled this, which
a possibility.
Yeah, a possibility which they may not have had, and so I'm bringing value to them, not trying to
people's stories, right? Repurposing the stories that you've heard from one customer, giving them to another. And the effect is that you're unlocking their imagination. Exactly. So, what is imagination? In your experience of it, what is the role of imagination in the receiver of a story?
It's the key piece of that, because as I'm talking to you, and as people are listening to us right now, there's a film roll going on in their head, whether they want to or not, as they're assembling these things. Yeah. And even if I describe a character, your version of the character, even though I describe it, is going to be different than what I'm describing, because you're doing it from your experience.
Let's do that as an experiment. So, hi, Roger Wilkerson, you'll play.
He'll play.
Jeffrey, you'll play. And Lori Knudsen, if you're still here, she'll play. So if you are around and you want to play a game with me and Doug, let's do this. Doug and I are going to, and this is just improv, and Doug leads with adaptability as a strength. So I know which is such a relief to me because I'm such an improvisational person. But Doug and I are going to kind of invent a person, right? We're going to name some characteristics and some parts of their story that we're going to make up right now. We're not talking about any real person. And in fact, until this moment, we hadn't even known that we were going to do this. So we're inventing a person. And what I want is for you in the audience to imagine an actor who would play that person in the story of his own life. We'll assign a gender. We'll create a man. Okay. And as soon as you have a vision, you're all the casting directors. As soon as you have a vision for who the person is, that the story, what their story is or anything, you put that person's name in the chat and we'll start pinning them. So I can begin to kick us off. I'm going to say that this person, this man, is an adult. And how old do you think he is, Doug?
I think he's about 50. I'm just picking a number right out there in the middle. So he's seen a little bit of stuff on that, but he's still got a long life to live.
Okay. I'm going to say that he is...
Roger's jumping in already.
Yeah. We already got ideas, right? Like the first.
Exactly.
Okay, so now this man who's about 50, I'm going to say that he does have hair. Doug, what do you think his hair looks like?
Well, he's very well dressed. He wears very, suits are always pressed and clean and all that. And he always looks like he's ready to go to a fancy dinner somewhere.
Okay, and so his hair is coiffed and he's all
because he has hair is coiffed.
Right.
We're good to go.
He looks great. He's always pulled together. For someone who's always pulled together and is always very presentable, what do you think this man has experienced during this pandemic?
I think he's pent up because he thrives on being out with people to get, because he gets stressed up and he got to have some place to go.
Yeah. I relate to that. I mean, not about getting dressed up, but certainly not having the place to go. So he's pretty social. He's social. He gets a lot of external validation, this man. Where do you think that comes from for him, Doug? Why do you think he needs other people and their opinions of him to give him confidence?
He doubts himself. He doesn't see himself as the person that the other people see. He's got this little inner voice that's telling him, you're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You don't dress well enough. Yeah.
And so he's compensating for that to build himself up and to kind of prove that unfortunate narrative wrong. Interesting how much about this person who doesn't exist, right? Like this is imagination. Doug and I are creating this. Okay. So now Roger has recast the man we've been talking about as Antonio Banderas. Could be cast as anything in any story ever.
He would be exotic. Yeah, he's got the accent and he'd be exotic about that.
Everything, as far as I know. All right, so when this guy enters the story that we're about to tell, what has just happened to him the moment before our story begins?
He comes across. He's. Man, this is a good one. What comes okay, this is his first venture out in a long time, and because he's come out, but he's just left an argument at home.
Okay.
Because he's been pinned up so long. He was arguing with his spouse.
Okay. Is he married to a woman or a man?
Yes.
Okay.
It's married to a woman.
Oh, okay. So he's married.
We'll go a little traditional, yeah.
He's traditional. And he's married to this woman. They're having an argument. What do you think they were fighting about? Could be anything. I mean,
it could be because you've been cooped up all this other time on this. So let's somebody from the audience. Let's see what they would come in to do this.
Roger. Okay, so you think Antonio's too confident to be our cast? Recasting Paul Giamatti. Okay, interesting to think about. And let's ask this question now: if we have Paul Giamatti, as
he doesn't have really good hair, does he?
About he has like maybe some, like
yeah.
But if we're casting Paul Giamatti, and he's the one in the story now, do we imagine a different fight, a different struggle, a different problem than we imagine for Antonio Banderas?
Yes, I would do that simply. And here's some bias coming in. Antonio Banderas, the macho, that all the stuff comes in. So it's going to be something more fiery. The argument will be more fiery and stuff on that one. But money is always a great one, Lori, that comes in on this one.
Everybody fights about money. Everybody fights.
Food delivery.
Yeah, well, one of them's more expensive than the other, so you can both be right.
And then Paul, I could see him arguing about, okay, well, I don't like this flower arrangement and stuff that's going on in there. He's a little bit more sensitive about maybe the things that are around where he lives.
Finicky, right? He plays finicky characters who are kind of bothered by something and the injustice of the world, and everything is on, right? So there are, I love this. They're fighting
equality.
Yeah. So look, we have created from nothing but our own imaginations and our own storages of data, a story that has never existed before, even though it represents so many people who are in a heterosexual marriage in their 50s arguing about money and food delivery. That could be, I don't know, 13% of America right now, right?
Yeah.
That's a good amount of people. If it's Antonio Banderas, his wife is so even thinking about the same story. You got a guy, he usually dresses nicely, he is in his 50s, he's married, like we have certain demographic data. But when you think about different people, even if it's just an actor who we don't actually know, we get a vision of them and a context for all the roles they played, all the times we've seen them look like certain sets of stories before. And that informs us in our storytelling. It informs us if we're going to be talking about a solution, right? Like this story eventually gets to, and then he encounters this guy who gives him this solution, and then ta-da, right? That's like how a story progresses. But even here in the beginning, when we're listening to who the person is we're going to be talking to, there are going to be some people who will buy a product that worked for Paul Giamatti, and there are some people who will buy a product that worked for Antonio Banderas. And you'll want to hear those stories because they either want to relate to I see myself as, or would like to see myself as Antonio Banderas, or people saying, I probably am more like Paul Giamatti. And either way, depending on their decision making, they're going to choose the story that helps them see themselves in the role of the person who ultimately will be receiving and using technology.
And sometimes it's an organizational type thing. So you can do the same thing to a non-entity, but it's an organization. It's a group people that are buying. And I call what we just did a composite character. And what we did was, and when I'm describing things, I'm taking bits and pieces. Some of them actually came out of me, but not the hair. But bits and pieces of different things, that we had. Or in this case, there in technology, no two companies are in exactly the same place. Yet I have the product suite that I have is the same. So now it's, and I've seen different customers at different stages of deploying and stuff. So that's where it comes in. And the story I tell is more than likely a composite. I have this customer did X, Y, Z, but they were here, and it's a composite of all these different stories that I've told. We built Paul Giamatti or Antonio Banderas in that story. And that's the key is the longer you've been doing this, the more of that wealth of information you can draw upon to build a more compelling composite character. But if you don't understand the company, the person you're talking, if you don't take the time to learn and educate yourself about them, then the story's not going to sound genuine, and it's probably not going to hit the mark.
And it'll be arbitrary.
Yeah.
Right? Like when we first started this, we said a man, and then we got George Clooney.
Yeah.
Got George Clooney.
Yeah.
We got Pacino, we got Antonio Banderas, we got, you know, without really having data of who it was arbitrary. Who the person in the story was, who we were making this for. The more information we had about what the story was going to be, the clearer our vision became. And that might have been different for different people, but our vision got clear because we had something to attach to. The greater the story, like the more engaging it is, the more clear the data set becomes for us, from which we know how to make conclusions. Like we know how to make decisions based on stories we've already lived through. So we're kind of bringing our brain through that process.
Yep. No, exactly. And when I talk to people sort of like, well, how do you start a story? I start where my customer or my audience is. If you don't start there, there's this chasm between you. It's sort of like the fourth wall, that there's this wall between you. And I don't want that. I need to make sure that just like we're sitting here side by side, that we've made that connection, and I understand where you are, or at least we're starting from the same place to go, let's go on this journey together. Because it is very much, we're going on this together. I'm not just trying to pitch it. I get a lot of, I tell people, you know, when I talk about, well, you're in sales, you have a quota and you have this number to meet. Yeah. But if I'm doing this other stuff right, that takes care of itself.
Right.
Right.
Well, that's your approach that works for you because you're not a sales guy. You've been a sales guy your whole career, but you're not a sales guy, right? So what works for you has opened the door for so many people who have thought they had to do it a certain way. And instead, by simply involving stories, things that they understand, things that they can share, it kind of opens up the possibility that everybody could sell something.
Yeah,
and
well,
right? We're all selling things all the time, aren't we?
Well, that's what Dan Pink says. 90% of the people out there are selling something. It's an idea. It's a concept. Think about an interview. What are you selling in there? You're selling yourself to somebody, right? So, or in an audition, you're selling yourself for that role. So we're all doing. Sales gets such a bad because you have these people that are, you know, if you go back to the medicine man, the guy, you know, trouble right here in River City and all these other things. But I know you would appreciate that. Half the other, what the hell is he talking about? But but you know, it's
P and that stands for pool.
Exactly. So, but it's, you know, and even this gets back to where we talked about listening to different points of view, because I'm reading a book now about how Steve Jobs did presentations, and I think he was the best. When I think of the best technical storyteller, he's who I picture when I come to do that, because he could do stuff with, I mean, and there's techniques that he used. I'm looking.
Yeah, that's before his, yeah,
that's a great thing. I'm looking at, well, I do that already. You know, I'm like halfway there. I just need to look good in a turtleneck and jeans. But you know,
I don't think anybody really looks good in a turtleneck.
No, but so there's what I do then is, but I'm not going to be Steve Jobs. So even when I get up there, I'm going to be me. So I take bits and pieces, put my own little spin on what that is. And again, this is it's just using, because don't try to be somebody else, because you know I try not to be me.
Your spin or being yourself. Like I guess let's take the case of selling a piece of technology to a whole organization and explaining to them how they might have amazing potential for X because they use B, right? And so you're up on stage. You have all of their attention. Someone else will say Lori because she understands that turtlenecks are offensive. Or is on a different stage selling the same technology to a different company, or to a different group within the same company. Let's keep the company the same so that the only variable is the storyteller. Same company, randomized group of people, same product that you're selling, two different storytellers. You're going to tell it your way, and Lori's going to tell it her way. How do you know what your way is?
It feels natural. It's you don't have to think about the mechanics of telling the story and going to do it. It's unconscious almost. You know, if you go around the 4 quadrants, I'm in the unconscious competent type part of that for a lot of the storytelling, because I've done it. And in fact, and we talked about this before when it's just us, I don't think anything that I do is that remarkable. I think everybody does this because I've lived this. This is my experience. This is where I am. And the things that I do, they don't come naturally because I've worked at it, but it's like anything else with repetition. It comes easier to do. And I know which, like a professional golfer, I know which club to pull out based on how far I am from them where the pin is. Well, I don't, but if I was.
But you also know what your story is. Like
Exactly.
You know your own stories. You know what you've lived through. You certainly can't tell Lori's stories of what she's been through with the confidence that you can share without having to try to fight to remember how something was for you.
And I can't tell it in the same manner that she does.
Well, she's
but that's that's a great thing. I try to stay out of the comparison time. Here, let me tell a story. Yeah. Before I came to work for Microsoft, I was a trainer. I taught technical training and went through the books, and I fell asleep the first hour of the class because the material so dry. So I have to make it fun. So that's me. It has to be fun. But I went in and we had this. There was 10 of the trainers that came into this thing, and we're going to do a road show. So if you've ever been, it's like a rally, a political rally, because you got fans of your company and stuff out there, and some of them are like 2,000 people, right? So we've got, this is back when mom and pop shops would build computers, and it was the funny thing about it. It was the guy that was leading this was a former Broadway actor. He had done this, so he was very flamboyant, very. I see a lot in you of the same characteristics of him.
All kind of part of the same group of extra, right?
Yeah, you've got the extra, right? There's no. But so we're going through and we're going through the whole week presenting, and there was a guy in there. I'll call him the professor. He's got the tweed jacket on. He's got the elbow patches. Very much very professional looking. His delivery is.
Attention to the fact that Doug is using visuals as an example.
Yeah, he was very, you just picture this he wasn't Bueller-ish, he wasn't dry, but he was coming across very confident and very, factual, and it was like respectful, like you would want, right? Mm-hmm. And I tried.
The professor, right?
Yeah, and I tried to emulate that.
Everybody that we've ever seen as that type of character before, so they're now informed. I'm just calling out some of your storytelling.
Oh, no. I appreciate that. And I was trying to do that. I was trying to emulate that when I got up there, and I was failing miserably. I couldn't remember things. I was stumbling over things. It was like I had my shoes were reversed. They were on the wrong feet. I remember talking about. Pardon?
Using an analogy.
Recalling
pain and discomfort that we have experienced ourselves at some point before. Relate to.
I guess I don't belong here. I was telling my wife that night before the big reveal, I don't belong here. I'm failing miserably. And she asked me, in all her wisdom, which she's always a good sounding board for me, you got to be yourself. That's not you. You are not. Anytime if I'm that stiff,
the hero in the story, telling something that people can emotionally relate to, and introducing a guide, your wife.
Yep, very. Thank God I've had her around for all these years. But the only time she said the only time you would be that stiff is when you're dead. So she has her own amount of humor in that. So I
for storytelling that plants us and relates us to the storyteller, connecting us through humor. When we are smiling, we are engaged, and our brains are more alert because we feel that we're going to benefit emotionally from the positive moment we are about to receive. Proceed.
Wow. This is great. Mr. Biddles approves.
He's the professor for real, though, right?
So I went in the next day, and it was just like, let's go. And there was mayhem. Stuff was falling off the table. I mean, but I left there. I felt really good. But I felt really good.
You felt really good.
Mm-hmm. And it was effortless. That was another thing. When I went through there, it was effortless. So I got a call when we left there. I thought I did pretty good, and I had 5 of the 20 dates that I was supposed to do. So I was happy with that. And I got a call. He says, "Look," and this was from the Cleve. He was the Broadway guy. He says, "Look, I waited for that person that you were on Friday to show up all week." He'd watched me, and he says, "You were the best one there." and I want you to do 10 of these shows with that, because you were just, you were great. That's the person I want to see.
And the payoff, the moral
Yep.
of the story then being assured that the guide was correct. The advice being yourself, which is use this product, right? Being yourself allowed you to connect in a way that was more successful than where you were when you were trying to be the professor.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm here all week.
Yeah. Oh, somebody's asking Bueller-ish, like in Stein, the actor. He's also the Queer Eyes. Not dry eyes. He has a very dry, monotone voice. He speaks like this most of the time, and he's famous for in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, starring Matthew Broderick, for saying Bueller, Bueller. So that's what that was.
And see, he would be horrible at a George Clooney role.
I wouldn't put them in the same place for sure.
No, but I'm just saying, if you or even Will Ferrell or something where you're trying to be, it's not that persona, right? Sometimes character actors get into that because they're so good, and that's what you picture when you do that.
Yeah, it's called being typecast.
Yes.
Like when I was
Ben Stein,
yeah, like he's always going to be cast as that, because it's once you play a very iconic character too, very hard to divorce in your mind the idea of that actor's portrayal of that character to imagine something else. For example, Megan Mullally in the show Will and Grace.
Yeah.
She was a very famous and successful Broadway actress for many years, has an incredible singing voice, and doesn't actually talk like this, honey.
Yeah.
How she talks. She has a little bit of that, but mostly, that's not how she speaks.
Yeah.
Mila Kunis is, known for her role in that 70s show as that like young and like kind of whiny, kind of annoying, kind of spoiled girl. And then like later comes out, and I don't remember what movie it was, but we were like, that's Mila Kunis? Like her voice is like this all of a sudden. And she's like, yeah, we could really, and it's a completely different experience of her. But she's been able to do something that many actors have not, which is once created this caricature, and be seen as anything.
How do you break out of that? That's sort of an interesting thing, which comes back to when I do my videos and stuff, or the way that they see me on LinkedIn. I go talk to my customers, and they tell me, you're exactly like you are in person as you are in your videos.
Best.
And I always tell them, well, thank God, because if I ever show up differently, it's a body snatcher, and it's not me, it's an alien run. It's because and that gets back to your original comment of the people that had this online persona and they weren't that way in person.
Yeah, and it was very disappointing, and it broke trust. I had listened to what they had to say in content for a while, and I was like, God, I don't really want to learn from them anymore. I'm now like, I now don't trust when the story is not true, which is the importance of using true stories. Even if they're not literally true, that they should be a representation of the truth. Commercials are a representation of the truth. When you have technology stories that are composites, they're a representation of the truth, which people can relate to them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's not magic storytelling. It's listening. It's empathizing with what they have, and its ability to sort of, what would I want to hear if I was in that person's thing? What would excite me about this thing that I have? And it's that's really all that it is.
If I were them, what would excite me about this?
Exactly.
Yeah. In acting, we have to find that thing, because we're very often playing characters who have nothing to do with us. And they're excited in a scene about a thing. But you're given that thing by the playwright. That's not the X to solve for. You have to solve for, like, okay, if I were in my life, what analogous whole scene would create in me the kind of reactions and responses to life that the character goes through in this scene? And then I have to replicate those experiences here, like kind of behind the scenes, like where no one sees what I'm doing. And then like, okay, what person can I substitute for Doug, who I love with all my heart? Like if I had to, pretend to hate you, like I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. No one is a good enough actor to pretend to hate Doug. What instead we would have to do is pick someone in our lives or in history or someone that we can recall emotionally, and we train to do this, and we imagine them where you are. So instead of seeing like your very fine head, I would see someone else's. And then I would hear the words that you were saying, like through their voice.
And annoy the hell out of you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, to like just even think about the devices of storytelling. I know that you have been very focused on technology and like that's a thing that you're selling, but storytelling as a thing, a way to connect people to ideas. We have these devices, story, some of it broke on this conversation, but the fact that we have stories at all is right, because we have choice. We don't have to tell stories. We can just give data sheets. I think most people know intrinsically why we don't do that. Like we don't have to be told why we
anymore. The data's out there. I mean, there was a time way back in the day before the internet stuff where I would, I could share data. Oh, okay, cool. It must be true because he's sharing data with me.
Right.
We've gone way past that.
And we're also in a culture right now where people are delegitimizing journalistic resources, saying, okay, well, that's fake news. So if that's the case, right, if people are no longer trusting data as being empirical and are treating facts like opinions that can be disagreed with, which is really what's happening, stories prove what's true. Stories help us understand experience that data alone cannot.
No, exactly. And our brains are wired to understand that. I talked about it in my TED talk. Our brains are wired that way. If you go back sort of the caveman, we didn't have words. You had pictures and other things, which you had to sort of, I didn't want to get stomped on by the watering hole. So I had to tell a story to my neighbors what not to do.
Right.
And we're just wired to do that way. And it's unfortunate that a lot of people have lost touch with that, or they don't teach it in school. I mean, I think improv and acting should be like one of your core subjects in every school because
I agree.
It teaches you personal interaction. That especially improv. The improv class I've taken taught me more about listening and saying yes and. It's such an empowering type thing when it's a yes and you build that relationship and trust.
We modeled that here today,
right?
In making up this story, and also just in the way that we have a conversation. I'll say something, and with many guests, I'll then ask a question to elicit a response. But with you, I can simply say something, and I know and I have trust that you'll yes and yes. In terms of like affirming what you've heard, confirming, providing examples, expanding. And that expansion is the and. And here's another side of it. And here's another use. And here's a story of mine that relates to it. So we become collaborative storytellers when one person says something, you really take the time to understand what the purpose is of them even saying it to begin with. And then the content of what they said. And then the impact that they want you to have because they've said that. Then you can respond either in a way that respects their intentions or respects the content of what they've said. It's a very valuable tool. It's very valuable. Lori Knudsen calling out that improv is used in some of the top business schools' executive leadership programs to teach them adaptability and creativity. Now, I am a creative by nature, and Doug, you are certainly creative. You are adaptable by nature. I think that we are talented in this way, but are there tools that you think anybody who doesn't identify as creative has a hard time coming up with new ideas on their own? Isn't storytelling a great way to look at what they already have looking in the knowledge that they've already experienced every single day of their life, being anywhere from 1 to 1,000 stories that come up, to enter a conversation and to be creative and to be collaborative. How do you see storytelling told in collaborative, innovative environments?
It's actually more open in those environments there. You're open for that because it's you're accepting and you're trying to build this. I like to call it thinking in a story. And as I'm looking at a scene or going along on that one, I said, well, I'd make a great story. How would it, what's the history? Sometimes I have to learn a little bit more about it, but if you're always open, I guess it's the open mind type thing as well, in that you're taking, because we don't really have control over what's delivered to us in any given day. There's things happen that are out, everything, a lot of things are out of our control. Willing to give up that control to accept what's coming in, and is there a story there? Is this something that I can make my life or somebody else's life better with that knowledge to go on? So that's in this open and collaborative environment. That's much about it. It's sharing ideas, and it's yes and it's occasionally you get the things where you will hit physics or something because you can only yes and so much with technology. But it's how about if we did it same philosophy, but we use this instead?
It's like choose your own adventure, right? Like it's really in the story.
Exactly.
You can say, okay, given all this context of the story, what if this one decision were changed? What if just this one moment, our protagonist in the story chose to do something just a little bit different? And that can be, those are the stories that happen in the product development conversations in technology, right? When they're like, okay, everybody has always done it this way. If we want to create something new, we tell the story. We imagine the story of how someone's currently using a product or currently lacking a solution. And we say, what if instead of this, it just changed a little bit?
Yeah.
With all of the story behind them, these product developers are able to imagine, yes, these are our circumstances, and it could be cool if the story pivoted in this way. So storytelling is used from beginning to end of a technology product cycle. Yeah,
and we've made a huge transition in Microsoft of going, here's the product group, and here's what you're going to get, and here's the product. So now we let customer input and feedback sort of drive the things that we add.
Oh, how does that work? How do customer stories?
So there's the my mind just went blank. But on any of our products, there's a place to give feedback.
Okay.
And it's the whole model's changed now, where the program managers and stuff are sort of graded and scored on how they adapted to feedback. Now, of course, you can't. I mean, some things are just too far fetched, or you're several iterations away before you can get there. But if you see a thing that gets upvoted and there's like 3,000 of them, hey, that may be something we should add and think about. We didn't even think about it. So the best ideas I have come from somebody else. I'm an excellent thief. I steal ideas all the time.
3,000 people.
Yeah.
Being brave enough to share their story, taking the time, personal responsibility for sharing where they were and what they needed, what they wished for. Yeah. It takes like 3,000 of those people, of maybe 55 million people. Who respond. If 3,000 people all have something pretty similar to say, it tells a pretty clear story of what's needed.
It does. Yeah, it does. And when you think about it that way, again, you're sort of going to where the customer is and coming back this way, and what can we do to do that?
Right.
Again, it's very circular. Everything we've talked about today comes back to that same thing of listening.
Leads into the next.
Exactly. Empathy, listening, open-minded about things, not being so hardwired into what you want to do. And then being able to relate that and verb that, and having confidence in doing it your way.
Yeah.
That's the key. At the end of the day, you distill all this down. I have to deliver that message my way, or it doesn't come. I break that connection. I can have the best story in the world, but I try to tell it the professor's way, and
Yeah, it has to be your story.
Exactly.
Right? Even if your story is just the way you deliver this, because you're a funny guy, you're a casual guy, you're a formal person, someone will always listen to you because you do it as you, more than they would have listened to someone else.
Right.
So showing as the storyteller you are, with the story that they need to hear, in order to see themselves taking a new action, just a little bit off the path of where their own story has brought them to the moment right before they heard you share your stories with them.
Exactly. Perfect.
I think that's a great place to button it up. I appreciate you being with me as always.
I'm honored to be the beta tester, the crash test. I mean, look, no bruises. We're all good.
We're great. Yeah. And I had a great time. I always have fun with you. I knew you'd be up for this. And I think that there's such good content in just the last hour of her talking that we should download this file and piece it out, and I'll just give it to you and let you deal with that.
Well, I think it's excellent. The same thing. I appreciate you asking me to do that. And we had, Lori and Roger and everybody was on there was being great with their feedback and comments and some really
funny people with us. Like if you even just like, we've got like a laugh riot group here. Darn. Yeah. So darn. That's our show.
Darn tootin', I like that. That's the truth.
Tech show. All right. I love it. I love you. I will talk to you soon.
You bet.
If you've been joining us and you haven't followed Doug Thompson yet on LinkedIn, you probably ought to do that. Check out the Tech Story podcast, which is where he shares stories with other people who are storytellers, and you hear and immerse yourself in this storytelling experience with a side of technology, which is the new tagline. I don't know.
I like that. We'll work on that. Thanks.
With a side of tech.
I tried to solve this word problem for what I would have for the tagline for the podcast for like weeks, and I was stressed. And I call Lila up, and I text Lila up in like 3 minutes. We've got this problem solved. So if you need to say things better, she truly is the greatest at helping you say things better.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being with me. We're going. Goodbye. See you on the play.